Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. I'm Ray Suarez. I'm the host of our radio program On Shifting Ground, which can be heard locally on KQED FM on Monday nights. I hope you listen. And always as a podcast. As a reminder, please silence your phones. Submit any questions for our guests via the question cards provided on the live chat. And we'll have physical written questions here in the room, and you can contribute your questions if you're watching us remotely. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Rachel Bitecofer is a political scientist, pollster, election forecaster, turned political strategist. She's the author of Hit 'em Where It Hurts: How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game. Jonathan Metzl is a professor of sociology and psychiatry and the director of the Department of Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University. He's the author of Dying of Whiteness: How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland, and more recently, What We've Become: Living and Dying in a Country of Arms. And Tara Setmayer is co-founder and chief executive officer of the Seneca Project. She's a former CNN political commentator, contributor to ABC News, and former GOP communications director on Capitol Hill. Great to have you with us. Let me jump in by sort of setting the terms of the conversation. Are we pretty much done? Are the four of us here kind of talking about a campaign that in many ways is over, and we're just counting the days till we put an official stamp on it, but essentially everybody knows who they're voting for? Do you agree with that, Tara?
I would agree that the majority of the American people know who they're voting for, but that sliver of undecideds, which I'll never understand at this point how you are still undecided given the choices here, but there are people who are still undecided, and this will be one in the margins, and in the margins of the 7 states. And it really literally is going to come down to every vote counts in each of these states, and the polling shows that, and Rachel can talk about that more, but I think that we cannot take it for granted. Just like in football, it's a game of inches. Elections are a game of margins, small ones. And I think all of us, the agita that we have about how close this is at this point in the race, given everything that we've seen and everything that's been on display, and the stark contrast between the two visions between these two candidates of what our country should look like and would look like under their governance. It's hard to imagine that there's still undecideds, but there are. And the election is still 3 weeks from today. And they have to run through the finish line. They cannot take their boots off their necks. They have to run through.
Jonathan, in the pages of your 2 most recent books, we meet a lot of people who, to me, don't seem very movable, shiftable. So what do we say to them in these final weeks? Is there still a campaign going on?
Well, I think in a 50-50 race like this, which seems like it is by all accounts, part of the story is mobilizing these undecided voters, who I agree they're probably being bombarded. I would love to know what it feels like to be an undecided voter right now. You're probably the most popular guy on your block. So that's part of the story, but it's also a story about mobilizing your own base, right? That also whose base is going to show up more, is also part of it. How many people are already decided, but are not going to go to the polls. So mobilizing your own base, I think, is going to be the most important thing. But I will also say that I've been thinking about the people I interview in Dying of Whiteness and what we've become a lot, because it's interesting. When I would meet people in the world, they were much more complicated than if I met them on social media. And so people would always tell me, I'm a strongly Second Amendment guy. And then we'd talk for like 20 minutes and they'd be like, but I wish we had to do gun safes or things like that. People are not 100% consistent. And so I have wished that we had kind of maybe done a better job at certain times of acknowledging the kind of messaging that might reach the people I interview with, and we can talk about it over the course of the conversation, but it's kind of like the Democratic core talking points. I'm a Democrat. Or do you want to stretch those beyond and talk about, like, for example, the people I interview, the importance of gun rights and freedom and liberty, and also responsibility and things like that. But it's complicated in such a short time to thread that needle.
Rachel?
I mean, there's much to be happening in the 3 weeks, though I think like it's important to kind of contextualize where we're at. We're in a toss-up scenario, right? And that can be hard for people in our audience or this audience or on this panel to understand how that can possibly be, as Tara has pointed out, with these glaring differences. But the hard truth is that most Americans don't have the little feeling that we have in our guts right now. I don't know if you have one, but I do. That worried pits feeling that will be with me until Election Day. And that's because they don't know any of this stuff that we know. And that's because they don't care, okay? They don't follow news or politics. They have zero interest in that. And believe it or not, a lot of these 3 week out people, that will be the very first time they even think about this election one time. So it's not over, right, in that regard. But one of the things I wrote the book to do, and the work I do with the Democrats on strategy, is about getting people to understand how much is baked in, because you alluded to a lot of it being baked in. And the fact is that I don't need to know anything about you. All the demos you hear, Harry Enton and Steve Kornacki on the big board, I don't need to know any of that about you. You could all just be a black dot. And I don't need to know if you're urban, rural, suburban, college educated, white, not white, woman, male, whatever, all those demos. What they do is they predict partisanship for a political scientist like me. And once I have that, I know 95% of the variance of vote choice for everybody, okay? So we're talking about partisanship being by far the most important determinant in vote choice. And I'll close by saying that is not amongst just people who say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. It also includes the bulk, about 80% of any sample of people who say I'm an independent when they're asked, I'm an independent, and then they'll be asked a follow-up question. Do you lean towards the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? Maybe you've taken a survey, and remember that, okay? And as soon as that person says yes, leaning one or the other, and an analyst like me, the analyst of New York Times Today, are taking those people and putting them into the party camps. And then when we do that and we look at the data, it is 96% of Republicans and right-leaning independents that voted for Donald Trump in 2020, and basically 96% of Democrats and independents that lean Democrat. So we really do talk about a scenario in which campaigns in the political science perspective are said to have minimal effects. The asterisk will always be that first debate.
I want to follow up on something you said about the lack of engagement.
Yeah.
That a lot of voters don't know all the stuff we know about this. All right, granted. And covering politics for the last 40 years, it was always a truism that people start paying attention at Labor Day. But this is 2024, when one of the major governing parties of our country picked the woman who would become the candidate in July. It isn't the only time someone who's been convicted of crimes is a major party candidate. Yeah. The only time that someone who's been impeached twice is a major party candidate. There's so many novelties about this year, and that's to put it charitably.
Yes.
How come that didn't pull people in to a different level of engagement, a greater, even casual interest in what was going on earlier on in this process?
I mean, that's a 10-minute answer. So
don't give me a 10-minute answer.
But I'm going to tell you this. Like, before the switch, we were looking at a scenario where we'd be sitting here 3 weeks out and the election would have been a toss-up still in the polls, but it would be a +3 advantage to Donald Trump, and I would be working on my passport application, okay? But so the switch is something I said, I kind of trailed off, but the switch is going to need an asterisk in all of the presidential election literature from the Academy forever, because it had such a gigantic effect So like, we're here kind of talking about October surprises, and, spoiler, my take is it takes a lot to move something. That switch moved us from a scenario where we were really stuck in a 2016 redux. Fair or not, the voters hated Biden as much as they hate Donald Trump, okay? Just a fact. It's not fair, but it's a fact. And we were looking at another everybody sucks election, like in 16. The fundamentals now are very different. And one thing that you left off on your list of novelties is probably the most important. We have never had a former president run again. So we don't have a clean challenger, and that has allowed Harris to kind of take over that change. And Plouffe has been very strategic about modeling her as the change candidate, because you would not ever be able to do that with a normal opponent.
I don't know how people, even those who are only modestly interested, can think, oh, well, if this guy wins, that's fine. If she wins, that's fine. Not that much difference. The old not that much difference stuff has died a very tough death in the last couple of years. There's a lot of difference.
Except I would argue that our mainstream media has normalized a lot of the extremism of Trump and MAGA to the point where it's allowed people who are not as engaged to brush it off. Well, that's just Trump being Trump, or that's just him being entertaining. He's not really going to do all of that. You take him literally, not seriously, seriously, not literally, that nonsense that we heard after 2016. And I think that has done an incredible disservice to people who, like us, who are not like us, where we live and breathe this every day, to regular folks who are just trying to live their lives and achieve the American dream, whatever that is for them. They don't internalize things the way we do. So they casually watch the news, or they casually talk amongst their friends and neighbors. And when you see when Donald Trump does something like, for example, last night, which was quite bizarre, if Kamala Harris had gone to a town hall and refused to take any more questions after several people fell out from health emergencies in a warehouse without proper ventilation, and then decided to bizarrely start swaying and listening to your playlist of arias and like other songs you're not licensed to have for 40 minutes, do you think the mainstream media would have just been like, Kamala Harris cut her town hall short because of medical emergencies? That's the headline, pretty much, on the majority of the mainstream media across the country, except for Washington Post, who actually got it right for once. But they have normalized a lot of what Donald Trump has done, said, his behavior, his obvious decline. And there's been a double standard here. And I feel the frustration for journalists who, my journalism professor at GW, Mr. Puffenbarger, is probably spinning in his grave. But he worked for the Washington Post for 40 years, I think. Through Watergate and all that, he was like a traditional tough journalist. And, it was always about, don't inject yourself into the story, it has to be objective. But we live in very different times, to your point. And I feel like for journalists, you're under no obligation to tell both sides of a lie. And that's what's happening with Donald Trump and MAGA and J.D. Vance and the Republican Party that I was a part of for 27 years and walked away from after I realized that there was no shame. There was no shame. There was no bottom. Truth didn't matter. Constitutional integrity didn't matter. Nothing mattered for these people but political expediency, power, and relevance. And the enablers have allowed Trump and the party to become what it is. Whereas the Democrats are finally adjusting and realizing, okay, wait a minute, we need to play the game that we're in, not the game that we used to know 20, 10, 15 years ago prior to Trump. We've got to start playing the game we're in and adjust. And Kamala Harris's campaign has done that, I think, pretty well in a short period of time, using social media, going after Trump the way they do. But the media is still covering this in a way that I think has allowed for so many people to still be disengaged and then just pop in here and there and think that there's really nothing to see here. This isn't really any different. All politicians are like that. And it's not the case. We're not going to be okay if Donald Trump wins. I'm sorry, we're not. It literally is life or death for women and life or death for our democracy as we know it if someone with the type of fascist authoritarian tendencies that Donald Trump and the people he surrounds himself with are in power, period.
Amen. What she said.
Jonathan, I wonder about the people who unironically refer to the J6 heroes, think that anybody who trashed the Capitol on that day should be pardoned and released from prison immediately. If Kamala Harris becomes president in January, they're not going to suddenly say, all right, well, Kamala Harris is president now, and we'll just see what happens. Are Americans reconcilable after November?
I mean, you know,
That's a different conversation, right?
You know, I
Well,
think,
that's why we have a shrink on the panel.
well, tell me first about your childhood. And, I would say that the people that I interview hundreds of red state gun owners, not even the January 6th people, but just people who are kind of living their everyday life and they're not getting their news from MSNBC or CNN. They're getting their news from podcasts. They're getting their news from, it used to be just Fox and Breitbart, and that was an easier target. But now the kind of moving target of different podcasts that until I talked to people, had not heard about, and different social media feeds, and Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, is incredibly slanted if you just look at follower counts and who's being amplified. And so it's not like there's one thing called the media. So what I'm always impressed by when I talk to people is first where they're getting their information. So MSNBC and Washington Post could be doing the best job possible, which I agree, we can't normalize both sides, but these other frameworks of where people are getting information and disinformation from other foreign actors, the China anti-Semitism story in the Washington Post last week. So it's just like there's no stable thing to normalize. So part of the story for me is where people are actually getting that information, which I agree the Harris campaign is trying to disrupt that in a much better way than other Democratic campaigns, but it's such an incredibly moving target. And then the other thing that frustrates me is, Trump is artful at critiquing things, right? Here's the government, here's the liberals, here's what's going to happen, taking Democratic points about the end of democracy and tweaking them as if like it's kind of like the old, when you were in fourth grade, I know you are, but what am I kind of thing.
I call it the Pee Wee Herman strategy.
So he just he takes the Democratic points and then just rearticulates them, and it defangs them for Democrats. And I've seen this happen, with guns and liberty, and I've seen this happen with healthcare when I studied healthcare reform. Trump is just innately good at that. And so the question is kind of pushing back on that. When I interview people, I honestly want to scream because I want to be like, okay, you're critiquing addiction or homelessness or other things. What's Trump's plan for fixing that? There's never a plan for fixing it. It's just critiquing it. But they see him as the disruptor, right? And so the more he disrupts, and that's why something like swaying to, Fleetwood Mac.
Ava Maria.
Yeah.
Ava Maria. Look, like what?
Yeah. But it's just
so bizarre.
The weirder disruption, the more the more they say, oh, he's just disrupting things. And so if one of the candidates is the dismantle candidate, the disruptor candidate, it's just hard because you can't then co-disrupt, but how do you call that out? And so it's just interesting to see those stories, which, I've discussed with my liberal friends, but seeing how they filter through red states, it's like the weirder the stuff, the more it reaffirms and another example of this, for example, was picking JFK Jr. RFK Jr. Sorry, a guy who's going to come in and just destroy the public health infrastructure. It's unimaginable for the doctors and professors I know, but for somebody who saw the pandemic as reinforcing their idea of government tyranny, somebody who's going to come in and destroy public health infrastructure was a great move. And so it's almost like one side is a builder and one side is a dismantler. And it just goes back to this question of such different visions. But I don't know, when I interview people, I think, how could I get through to you in a way that is trying to show joy or support or infrastructure or something like that? And it's tough.
Are Americans reconcilable, Rachel?
No.
On November 6th?
Yeah, it's tough. I think like 2 months ago, I wrote on this on my Substack, and I said, look, America's going to go through some things, because if we lose, it's going to be terminal for our democracy. And Tara is not wrong, right? Like if you're holding on to, and humans are optimistic people that have a hard time panicking about stuff and accepting bad, really truly bad things can happen, right? I mean, speaking to a bunch of people who live in an earthquake zone, right? Every day, and they walk around like they don't even notice, right? So it's hard to get people to focus on a like really absurdly bad outcome, but
especially one that's not tangible.
One that's
an
not
esoteric
tangible.
Concept to a lot of folks too.
And so, here's the thing, like that's obviously the worst thing that could possibly happen. If Donald Trump wins the election, it is going to be terrible in all the ways that Tara described and worse, right? But if he loses, they have already seeded the Big Lie 2.0. That Big Lie 2.0 takes advantage of our big hearts because we didn't want to say no to the migrant crisis, right? We took a long time to shut that border down. So long that 6 million people came across it in a year, or basically a couple of years, right? And they have told them, of their voters, the people that are MAGA, along with other things that they believe, because we're talking about 40 or 50 million people who believe things that are factually, provably wrong, like the election was stolen and that COVID vaccines kill you and that Dr. Fauci should be in jail. We're not talking about 10 million people. We're talking about multiple
And that
millions.
Haitians are destroying Springfield, and Venezuelans are running Aurora.
And FEMA.
Yes, all of it. And they believe it all, right? So what's going to happen if Trump loses, and they're hoping on the Red Mirage 2.0, where the election day voting is heavily favored for Republicans because they're not voting early anymore because of Trump. And then they can say, you can go to bed at 11 and it looks like he's leading in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and then you wake up and suddenly he's not, and it must be stolen, right? I mean, I know that seems hard, like it's such an obvious trick that David Copperfield wouldn't pull it off, right? But it is in their minds 100% true. And so the damage, there will be damage, I think, okay? And Metzl, John and I, we did a podcast, just so happens, on Jan 4th. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that, actually.
Okay, and it sounded a lot like this.
Yeah,
okay, so if you want to poo-poo us, okay, just so you know, it sounded a lot like this. I hope the violence is minimal. I hope it's focused in a few regional places or what have you. But the scope of it will come down to whether Mike Johnson, who used a modifier the last time he was asked about election certification, he said, as long as it's free and fair.
Yeah.
And as long as is the modifier, right? And in the Republican mind of today, it's free and fair if Trump wins, and otherwise it is a fraud, right? And I have great concerns that the media will play the assist again, because the big lie first time it could have been ended day one if the media said, we knew Trump was going to do this. He was talking about it for months. It's fake. Don't believe it. Instead, what did they do? 2 months of let's let them prove it. And you can still hear this when you have a person come on the TV. You'll hear them say, well, they don't have any evidence of that. No, it's the opposite. In fact, we did a forensic audit, the most intensive forensic audits we've ever seen of our electoral system. So not only did they not find evidence, we know that there was no evidence. We know it for a fact. And, if the media plays ball on Big Lie 2.0, which is that we let millions of illegals come into the country and vote in swing states, that's what they're saying, not what I'm saying, okay? And they provoke violence coming from all of the, big tier of the Republican Party, because it's bad enough you got your Tucker Carlsons out there, but you got Mike Johnson, you got Mitch McConnell, you got Elise Slotkin, right? Especially Elise. Stefanik, thank you. Because Slotkin's great.
She's great. We like her.
I was gonna say, wait, what happened?
They have...
You have J.D. Vance.
They have the fate of people in their hands, And I doubt they understand that. But it doesn't change the fact that people will die if they choose to play ball about election fraud again. And the stakes are bad.
Well, Tara, I worry that something even deeper has happened. The possibility of violence, obviously, is appalling.
Yes.
That people are going to get hurt about this is
Innocent
obviously terrible.
Yep.
We're going to be writing about the aftermath of an American election the way we write about elections in Mali or Indonesia or Malaysia. It's not just the violence, though. It's the fact that half the country no longer believes in the solidity, the virtue, the trustworthiness of our institutions. In the last couple of years, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to people about, for example, unemployment. And they'll say, unemployment's much higher than it was. And I'll say, no, it's not really. And it's the same civil servants who were counting when Donald Trump was president, and they're pretty much doing the same thing every month to come up with numbers that are pretty similar to the kind of numbers they came up before. And they said, now, you believe that?
Yeah.
You believe that? And they have bailed out on the idea that the GDP numbers are real, that voting's real, that unemployment's real, and that makes the most powerful person in any group the person with the loudest voice in the room, rather than the person who's correct.
Right. Yeah, it's a shout out to my good friend Tom Nichols. He wrote the book, The Death of Expertise, which really helped me to understand this phenomenon. And he wrote that back in 2016, I think, 2015 or 16. It was a great precursor to the era that we're in, because so many people are willing to not only reject expertise and facts and truth, they will tell you that you are the idiot for believing that or explaining the facts or being the expert. They actually resent you for it, and it makes them feel more relevant because they're insecure about their own inadequacies. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that. A lot of people in this country are unwilling to believe what's true, because then it forces them to have to acknowledge what they've enabled and accepted. And the fact that they were duped or that they were misled, people don't like to take responsibility, unfortunately. And so, I mean, the psychiatrist can tell us about that. But that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing people, they'd rather dig in than admit that they were wrong or miscalculated or were led astray by something. And one of the, I don't want to use the word genius, but I will say one of the more successful things that Donald Trump did very early on was discrediting the media and discrediting expertise. Because as long as he did that, then where do people who don't have those expertise, where do they go? You dismantle the institution so there's no trusted voice, so that he can manipulate the flow of information. And it's been incredibly successful, and that's what we see. And so I fear that this is first of all, no matter what happens on November 5th, we're probably not going to know the result right away. But regardless of what the result of this election is, this is a generational fight. It doesn't end on January 20th at noon and whoever's inaugurated. This is a generational fight for the reasons that you asked before. Can we reconcile? What does the country look like when you've got half the country that doesn't believe that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? They believe the opposite. And they will go to the grave believing that. They will cut their family members off if they're told it's the opposite. It is a cult in a way that I don't think we've seen in this country in a long time. And Carl Bernstein said before 2020 that he felt that we were approaching a cold civil war that could go hot. And Rachel and I were talking about this in the green room. The percolation of this now and what Trump has been able to do and gotten these people riled up into possibly taking up arms again scares me. And it is a very real possibility because of all of this. We've been divided into these enemies. And that is, I don't know how we come back from that, honestly, when we don't have trusted institutions and trusted voices and people respecting the democratic norms and institutions. How do we come back from that? I'm not sure.
Jonathan's dying to jump in.
Because this is exactly, so my most recent book, What We've Become, is a critique of the public health framework around gun safety. I am a doctor. I believe in public health strongly. I believe that we need background checks, red flag laws, but I also think that the public health framework, which was about, everybody communally get along and we'll, we all want the common good. Let's all put our names into a federal database when we buy a firearm, or if somebody looks like they're spiraling, call the police to come do an assessment check on your relative, who can then take that person in front of a judge and temporary whatever. I believe in all those things. But I would also say that we missed the boat in a way in this framework because, as I argue in my book, guns were not just a health problem, they were a democracy problem. And part of the story was about how the politics around guns and many other issues were profoundly anti-democratic, that they were being used to arm people in an event of something happening. They were also, like the Bruen decision on down, overturning the democratic sentiments of voters. And so we've had these democracy threats for a while. I mean, that's kind of the story I tell, but the framework, it's not just the media, it's actually the frameworks that we put around them tend to minimize, because it's so horrible to think about, the bigger implications of what this all means. And I do put guns on the top of that list just because the implications of what that kind of sentiment are so material and real, but that's also traced through a bunch of other everyday logics where people are against each other. I have a colleague from Hungary, and I asked her, like, what did it feel like when Orban won? Like the day, and she said, first, I want to tell Americans that the day after things really changed for us, I realized my life was changed forever. I never realized that before, but all of a sudden, the chemical composition of my body changed in a way. I'm in the opposition to this thing. And I said, well, did it play out in any one thing? And she said, all of a sudden, neighbors were willing to tell on each other.
Yep.
That's when she, and so it's not just about like.
That sounds like Texas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's already happening. Yep.
It's that logic where people are not Americans. They're actually rewarded for surveilling. They're surveilling and telling on each other. And for me, that's the issue, is going to be all these anti-democratic issues are also mobilizing common sense in a way that people end up policing each other, which is what happens in many other countries that we have not been in that category before.
It happened in Germany. It happened in Italy. We have seen this before. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a wonderful historian, she wrote the book Strong Men. She's on the board of my Seneca Project organization and warns about this. And we're seeing it already with women and reproductive health in places like Texas. They're doing this already. They want people to tell on each other if you've had an abortion or if you've driven someone out of state to go get reproductive care. This is insanity. And but it's a slow burn of it. It's the slow burn of it. And we don't realize we're losing our democracy until it's gone. It's kind of like gravity. It's always there. You take it for granted until you don't have it anymore and can't breathe. It's very difficult to recover. And that's what we're all trying to avoid.
Right.
It's when you have a major presidential candidate in a party that's looking to Hungary and Viktor Orban as the example. Hungary, he did the same thing, just like Hitler. Everything Hitler did was legal. Well, everything Viktor Orban did was using the structures there under the guise of democracy, and look what he's done. So they're projecting to us what they're telling us what they want to do. We just have to pay attention.
I want to talk more about Dobbs and Roe, but I don't want to lose guns. One more follow-up with Jonathan, because you've written so well on this. The other day, Elon Musk, when he was appearing with Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, got a huge hand when he said that the guarantor of the First Amendment is the Second Amendment. That the ability to own guns is what gives us our freedom of speech, religious practice, right of assembly, and so on. Which, all right, I'll admit it. As a reporter, I like to take an arm's length view of these things, but I'll admit I think that's an icky idea, and one that really is not my idea of America, that the way that we have religious freedom is because we can shoot each other if somebody gets mad. But I think we sometimes miss in these conversations that guns are more than just a gun. There's a mystical aspect to this that we may not talk about enough, because a lot of the people who say that guns are a big issue for them hardly ever shoot. They have a gun in the house. The gun is more than just a gun.
And that's part of the argument of what we've become, is that the public health frame, which again, just to say again, I support, but it largely focuses on gun-related injuries and deaths. Every injury and death is one too many, as far as I'm concerned. We tragically lose about 50,000 people a year to guns in this country, but there are more guns than people, over 400 million guns, civilian-owned guns in circulation, 200 million gun owners. And so the public health frame doesn't assess the meaning of what it means to carry a gun because of the implicit bias you have when you're driving down the street and somebody told you that there could be a gangbanger or a carjacker that's going to like break into your car. I mean, so a lot of people I interview, they'll tell me like, oh, I could pull up to a bodega and Mr. Saggy Pants gangbanger could come over and carjack me. And I'll say, well, did that ever happen? And they'll be like, well, to be honest, I've never been to a bodega. I just heard about it or something. But this idea,
I'm so surprised.
Yeah, I know, because they're not. Yeah, but so this kind of anticipatory threat, which ties into all these things, which tie into gun ownership, which is for many people, the government could break down your door and all these kind of things. And our framework just doesn't talk about that enough in a way. And so it'll be, I don't want to say it'll be interesting to play out how this plays out. I know how this is going to play out, but I will just say that we've had a couple of decades now in a row of the NRA marketing guns as marks of identity in a way, which makes it much harder for us to say, let's all get together and share public health. We're, I think, too slow in talking about the meaning, the social, political, identity, racial meanings of guns.
You know who else knows that? Our foreign enemies.
Yep.
Which is why the Russians and others have used disinformation through the gun lobbies to further divide us. And just check out the Mueller report and the extent in which Russia did that, starting in 2014 and beyond. And then all of the stuff that happened with the Russians infiltrating the NRA and the gun lobbies, and they understand our culture and they know where the pain points are.
And it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving for them. Like to say, like it seems ridiculous if you're not in that world to say that Trump's going to say, no, I'm not going to let liberals come and take your guns because, like, I don't know, I don't want to take any. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But the idea that basically the government or liberals is coming to take your guns, which is what Trump said at the NRA convention this year, it just plays to this eternal threat of needing to be on guard all the time against liberals, against the government, and so guns become this material way of signaling I'm on your side and I'm not going to let this thing happen, even though from a logical standpoint, I don't know, nobody's really taking anybody's gun right now.
To Dobbs, there are a lot of metrics that point to this being a terrible issue for Republicans. They've lost multiple statewide races over it, red statewide races over it, both in referenda and in particular candidacies. But the sort of slightly giddy stuff I saw early on about Rovember and so on, I don't know, it seemed like a little too confident by half. Here we are 3 weeks out. I don't know if it's Rovember.
Well, it would be if people would focus on it, right? I mean, yeah. So, here's the thing. People are going to be shocked to hear this. You should really read the book so that you can realize, oh my God, almost everything I hear people talk about elections is wrong, according to an academic that studies this, okay? And one of it is this, okay? I was telling you, people aren't like you, and here's a good thought experiment for you to kind of get a sense of how an average person is thinking about the political world. NASCAR, I'm guessing, unless they're the Virginia guy, nobody in here is a fan of NASCAR, okay? I want you to think for a moment and name me one famous current NASCAR driver. Anyone got one? Yeah, I didn't think so. You know why? Because you don't read about it. You don't watch about it. You don't follow it, okay? And it's not about time. It's about interest. You don't have an interest in NASCAR. You don't have an interest in something. You know nothing about it. And that's when we talk to average people, and we've known this for decades now. It's only gotten worse since the digital age. They can't name anything except for the president, who's currently the president, and some broad articulation that they have a constitution, a separation of powers, and checks and balances. They could not explain those things to you, but they know that they exist, okay? And so when we think about that, all the people who've been caught in the cogs of the Texas abortion ban, I've been fortunate to talk with many of them. The question I always ask all of them is, did you even know there was a ban? And the answer is always no, guys, okay? And that's why I asked the question. So like it comes down to this. Rovember is going to happen at the presidential level. They've been very effective, as Tara has pointed out, because they have gone all in on new strategy. But in most of the swing map, they have not. They're holding on to this idea that it's about debates and ideas and policy, and that's what's going to move people to win elections, which may be true in 1980 when the Republican propaganda machine was just in its infancy, okay? But it is certainly not true in 2024, where that propaganda machine is setting narratives that are going down and creating things like Donald Trump had the best economy in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Voters believe that because that's all they hear from right-wing media. And they don't hear from right-wing media, Donald Trump had the best economy in the world. Sure, there were so many problems we couldn't get to, like this, that, and that. There's no equivocation, okay? It's just, it was great under Trump, period, bottom line, and people absorb that. So the long and the hoe of it is there are going to be millions of voters that are going to walk into swing races here in California, in Orange County, in Katie Porter's old district, and they have no idea that Republicans banned abortion. I know that seems hard to understand, but it is the truth, right? And in the book, I talk about our top tier consultants in the party, especially the ones that run the Senate campaigns. They do not believe, they don't understand that it doesn't have to be the most important issue going in. It just has to be the most important issue coming out, okay? And Republicans get this. So when you look at 2021 in Virginia, they won a lean blue state. How did they do it? They ran on an issue nobody had ever heard of, let alone cared about.
CRT.
Right, prior to the election. And they got everyone to run, all the state house delegates, the statewide candidates, and the gubernatorial Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin is a business dude, okay? If he was in our party, the consultants would be like, Glenn, you know, your background's business and economics. Let's, you know, da-da-da. And like, we do it like that because we think of an imaginary electorate that doesn't exist. Nope, Republicans are like, Glenn, we know you don't give two shits about public education. But if you wedge race in school and the message was, hey, white people, they want to make you feel bad about being white, okay? That's what CRT means to the layperson, and they won, okay? So the answer to this is we're going to see, just like in 22 when I document where we did new strategy and versus old, and we lost every race that we ran old strategy on. I wanted very badly to be able to sit here 3 weeks from election day and say every race in the country is pounding and making sure these tuned out people hear about how freaky the Republican Party is and how extreme and dangerous for them, not for out groups, not for people they don't give a shit about, for them personally, their kid, their daughter, their wife, right? And I failed in that regard, but I am glad that the top of the ticket got the note and the DNC got the note, but there's a lot of decentralization on our side. And so what to answer your question, we would not have won in 22 without the Dobbs effect. The Dobbs effect is still there. If we win and we overperform the polling, which we may well do this cycle, it will be because of the Dobbs effect, but it will not be universal. A lot of the down ballot races did not do this, and they are set to lose.
Well, that's Tara, actually there are referenda on abortion in several key states.
Correct.
And Republicans fought ferociously to keep it off the ballot.
Still are.
It's on in a lot of places. Does it matter when you break it down by state to have a state, Arizona, Georgia, voting on this?
It only matters if you tie them together. And
Correct.
Tara's going to say that, so I'm just going to let her say it.
No, yeah, thank you. That's why the Seneca Project exists. We started the Seneca Project, my co-founder Michelle Kinney and I, as a bipartisan approach to speaking to moderate women, particularly in this election cycle, to explain to them what is at stake post-Dobbs. Because there has been a tectonic shift in the political landscape because of Dobbs. First time ever a right was taken away from a group in the United States. This has never happened before. And we as women represent more than 50% of the population. And it didn't really sink in because there were a lot of people, like I said, I spent almost 30 years in the Republican Party. I knew the abortion politics of it. I've evolved considerably on this issue because even I didn't fully appreciate how much reproductive care was health care, and the way it was messaged by Republicans for years had conditioned so many women into believing that abortion was not health care. And after Dobbs, a lot of Republican women and men who were impacted by this realized, oh boy, abortion actually is healthcare, and this affects us too now? Wait, my daughter's 12 and she's raped and she can't get an abortion now in 20-something states because of what? Wait a minute. So it shifted, it made people have to pay attention because now it impacts you in an everyday life. Everyday life. And for us at the Seneca Project, we said that, listen, the threat to women, the assault on women's rights transcends party lines. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're bleeding out in the lobby of an emergency room in a state that has now criminalized women's reproductive health care, where doctors have to choose between saving your life and their Hippocratic oath or possibly being prosecuted and going to jail for 99 years, like in Texas. Now, Texas was the microcosm because SB 8, that was passed a year before Dobbs. That was the precursor. And then you had all these other states with the trigger laws. And then you saw women, particularly women, older women who were alive pre-Roe, or who remember their grandmothers telling the stories of how they couldn't make their own decisions on, in the emergency room or in the birthing room when they were giving birth. They had to get their husband's permission. Women are saying we are not going back. When Kamala Harris embraced that, and I actually felt pretty proud about this because we launched Seneca in June, and our first ad was called A Time for Choosing, which was a double entendre for any Reagan fans in here. Maybe not the audience for that, but The Time for Choosing.
I got it.
Yes. Time for Choosing was a double entendre because for women, we are in a time for choosing. It kind of taking that language back, that the right to choose is so much bigger than just about abortion. But the idea of going back, the Seneca Project name came from the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, coalition of women. It wasn't just white women. You had male allies, you had abolitionists, you had women of color. It was a collective effort to gain equal rights as women. Well, this time around, it's a coalition effort. And we won't go back. The idea of going back to a time where women were treated as second-class citizens is unimaginable to women who remember those days, and to women who are going now saying, my daughter's gonna have less rights than my grandmother. There's something fundamentally wrong with this. So when you have the issue front and center, and it's presented the way it's going to be presented now as a ballot initiative in these states, to Rachel's point, you tie that together, it's front of mind. Yeah. And what we've done at Seneca Project and the ads and the content that we put out, we are reminding women and men, because we also did an IVF ad targeting dads, because they play a role in this too. But you remind them that this is actually what's happening every day. These are the stories. Women are dying, women are losing their lives, they're losing their ability to have children, they're becoming sterilized. You have young women who were raped and are forced to carry their rapist babies because of these draconian laws that were set in motion because Donald Trump appointed 3 people to the Supreme Court that lied during their nomination process about Roe and decided to do this. And the cascading effect, it's not just about abortion. It's no-fault divorce. It's IVF. It's women's rights to vote in some places. Yep. If you listen to these right-wing crazies that despise women, this whole idea of what Donald Trump is doing, this whole manosphere that they're doing, this like hyper bro type of election, they hate women. The misogyny is unbelievable. The undertone of all of that, the Christian nationalism, the subjugation of women, all of these things. Missouri, for goodness sakes, wanted to make it illegal for a pregnant woman to get divorced.
Yep.
These are all things happening at the state level that organizations like mine and others have got to continue to explain the stakes and bring that information. And when people see that, they say, oh my gosh, no. And also the privacy issue too, because a lot of women, it is your ballot, your choice. No one has to know. And it's the ballot box is one of the last few places where women have the privacy to do what they want, and the government or their husbands or anybody else cannot tell them what they can or cannot do. So when you make that decision, we're pushing this also for women to explain to them, listen, the permission structure you need, especially moderate women in these swing states, it's a private decision. It's your ballot, your choice. It used to be my body, my choice. It's now my ballot, my choice. And that's what that has to be a fundamental consideration when they're going in to vote this time.
Jonathan, you spent a lot of your working life in Tennessee.
Yeah, which is what I was thinking.
As you heard Tara's passionate litany of issues, are voters in Murfreesboro as head up about these things as Tara is? Are they gettable? Are they likely to listen to somebody ringing the alarm bells and saying, no, they're coming for birth control too. Like, for real, it's not just Dobbs and it's not just abortion, it's other things as well.
Well, I believe in coalitions of women, and I strongly support. I just think the power of that is untapped and unseen a lot of times. This has nothing to do with this, but I was in New York and I took the train back, and it turned out it was also the train coming back from one of the WNBA games, and I was the only dude on the train with all these WNBA fans, and it was the most powerful. I just thought, I'm for you guys, take over, please. It was, and I would never, for me, the WNBA, because it's not totally on my radar, maybe this year, but I just thought, wow, there's power in this experience right now, and it's not something that is on the radar. So so part of it is just to acknowledge that I'm the wrong person to acknowledge what that is until I felt it, and I'm like, please, this train take over the entire country and fix every problem we have. But I will say that the lesson for me of Tennessee is a lesson of habituation that people get used to. I mean, my fear about Dobbs is that in 2022 it was really fresh. People's rights were being lost. There was no real effective counter to the anger that wrought. But now it's a couple years later, and people are kind of used to the idea that the Supreme Court did this. And part of the story.
Women are. What do you mean? Women are not.
I totally understand that, but I guess the reason,
imagine where you would be 2 years out, right? If they stripped your control of your own body, right? I wouldn't even be able to have a PhD. Yeah. So it's an economic issue. Abortion's economic, right?
Correct.
The point of getting rid of abortion isn't about babies. It never was. It was about preventing women from being able to control the reproductive system so they could go and delay having children to get a PhD or pursue a career, right? And you don't get over that. There's no getting over that.
That's why J.D. Vance's childless cat ladies and the constant remarks that came out about him. Seneca Project was one of the people that made sure people were aware of what he said, and still are doing that. But that's why it was so offensive, because it's these men are looking at women as our only value is through our ability to have children, and that is such an antiquated, very dangerous point of view that they like the idea of controlling us so that we are at their beck and call for what they want to do. That is not the America of 2024 moving forward that I think most women want to live in.
It's not the America of 2024, but hold on just a moment. He is not a nut. He's a guy who was chosen as a major party candidate for vice president at 39 with almost no resume.
That's what makes him more dangerous than Trump, frankly.
He says those things not because he's high.
Because
he says them because they work and they motivate people,
and he means
and they hit people where they live, and he means it.
Yeah. Well, the psychology of that is that he's got mommy issues. So if you want to talk about that, he has issues with women.
I mean, here's the problem with the peak thesis. No offense, but here's the problem is it assumes saturation of knowledge, right? That everyone now knows, and therefore there can't be any more outrage. And what I'm here telling you is actually most of the people living under these abortion bans have no idea, as of today, that abortion was banned, let alone be able to articulate.
Wait till you hear that when it's broadcast.
Let alone do they know that it's because Donald Trump and Republicans banned abortion. So when you asked me, these initiatives matter, right? They matter if you link them, because this is what we're going to see. There's 4 states with initiatives: Florida, Nevada, Arizona, Montana. We are going to see those initiatives all pass, and my guess, if they're doing it in Kansas at 63,
Missouri too,
somewhere at 75%.
Yeah,
25% of that vote is going to split its ticket between saving abortion and re-electing an abortion banning Republican, and they're going to do that because they don't know. Okay, and just to take it back to guns, Jonathan, imagine this: imagine a gun initiative in which so many people vote for some radical Second Amendment initiative and then accidentally vote for Democrats. It would never happen, okay? And the reason is because of the COM system and the strategic messaging that they have.
And that was kind of my point in answer to Ray's, which is, I've seen, living in Tennessee, there is always a moment where something is proposed by the Republicans in Tennessee in the GOP that is just unimaginable for most people. I mean, in Tennessee, just guns alone.
Marrying 12-year-olds.
Marrying 12-year-olds.
That's a real bill.
That was you know, so there's always something that is like shocking to most people. And even after a mass shooting, after the Waffle House mass shooting, the GOP proposed allowing 18 and older to carry long guns down the street without any stop, which is exactly what the mass shooter just did like 3 weeks before. So it's shocking, but then they're so good. Their comms is not just countering it. It's like, you know, muddying the water with all these other kind of things so that a couple years later when it gets to a vote, you've just been barraged by a million other things. And so it wasn't like anybody's going to habituate Dobbs. But it's that the Republicans have had 2 years to like bombard with CRT related nonsense about a bunch of different issues that...
Well, that's why they're focusing on immigration and migrants.
Yeah.
The fear of the other and all of that, taking some problems, because obviously the immigration system is broken and we have a problem with border security. I worked on this issue for many years in Capitol Hill. But conflating all of those things into becoming that this is the reason for everything, there's a reason for that. Republicans are very good at staying on message and keeping it very simple. And so Democrats have a tendency to want to explain the points and picas of things. And to Rachel's point, this is not a policy election at all. It's a cultural election, and it's an election a lot of times about perception. Perception is reality. And Republicans have repeatedly gone over and over and over and over again, creating this perception that Donald Trump has the best economy. Why hasn't Joe Biden gotten credit for the economy and what he's done? It's because they won't go the self-indulgent route of taking credit for it over and over and over again, because it's not proper. You know, it's not the way things used to be. That's true, but it's the way it is now. People need to be entertained, unfortunately, in the society we live in now. So all of these things are contributing to this. And, you know, you look at it and you go, are people not going to pay attention to the abortion issue? Yes, they will. Because when you have the ballot initiatives in these states and you put them together, Trump and Republicans do not want anyone talking about abortion.
That's
it's political kryptonite for them.
Yes.
Kryptonite. And they knew it. And so that's why Trump had to scramble around and have like, I'm about fertilization, that thing. Yeah.
They know
and what? National abortion ban? No. That's craziness. But I'm not going to vote for the ballot initiative in Florida to codify it. Well, which is it? They don't know what to do with it. So they're trying to make sure you're distracted with everything else, because when people actually know what that means, that is a very scary prospect. And even for men, particularly men that have daughters, they are millennial men who have daughters are not comfortable with their daughters not having rights. And frankly, you know, and research has shown this, the most persuadable relationship is a dad and a daughter. Not spouses, not siblings, it's daddy-daughter. So when daughters are talking to their dads and going, Dad, do you see what this means? You're going to choose Donald Trump over me?
Yeah.
Are you going to put my life at risk? You've always been my protector. You're going to put this guy in power who thinks that I shouldn't have these rights? That's a very powerful message, and that's one that Seneca Project has also been working on as well in these final weeks.
When I do my book talk, I usually say to the audience, listen, because I always get pushback, Ray, on this. Why should we focus micro on one thing? And if you read the book, you'll understand why. Or Tara, okay? You'll understand why. But here's the thing I always ask the audience. What is the one thing that Republicans don't want to talk about right now? And that answer is obviously abortion. The audience usually yells. You guys are a little bit, I'll excuse you because it's like before a second espresso time. And maybe you just had lunch and you're feeling full. But it's abortion, okay? That's why we should be talking about it nonstop, because it's such kryptonite that Trump threw the entire pro-life movement under the bus, doing all of this dancing around, okay?
That's why they took it out of the platform during the convention.
I mean, it'd be like us telling, let's think of a clear base, like, okay, we're not going to do climate change anymore, okay? It's just not going to be a thing because it's not popular in the Rust Belt, right? Like, you guys would be mad, yes? Pro-life activists are very mad at Donald Trump. He paid a significant cost to do those things, and the reason, folks, is because
they're not going to not vote for him.
Terrified if they would have listened to me and done all freedom wedging, big government grab, they would be setting up for a big fat loss right now.
Let me stop everybody right there, because We could do this for a long time.
Yep.
I would ask for the indulgence of the audience for a few extra minutes. Can I have a few extra minutes? This is going okay, right? Because there are excellent questions from the audience.
Great.
And in order to get to them, I have to make these people stop talking.
We're all doing therapy in public. That's what's happening here, okay?
Right. Well, I said recently that I think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance should both go through extensive therapy because one's got daddy issues, one's got mommy issues, and then throw Elon Musk in there and they should have a group trauma therapy session together. And as a country, we shouldn't have to be held hostage to their unresolved childhood trauma by them being in power.
I'm charging extra for that session.
Yes.
Well, we can check with Jonathan.
Right, that's right.
How does each candidate lose the race in these final weeks? We opened by saying that not many people are going to change, but there is a possibility that you could set a foot wrong, do something really crazy, or events can intervene, like Helene and Milton, that might show your ass in a way that you don't want to. How could both candidates lose in the final weeks?
We'll start with Rachel this time.
So Harris could lose if she listens to the progressive base that wants her to focus on bold policy, progressive policy. Okay, this is a time to value American values, not prioritize progressive values. I'm a progressive, okay? It's about surviving a democratic collapse, and so she could lose if she does that. And I hope they understand it really needs to be a referendum on Donald Trump. And the only way you make a referendum effect is to have the conversation 80% about him, not about her, right? Trump's Achilles heel, they took over the RNC, the Republican National Committee. It is now the Trump National Committee. What you guys may not know is that the RNC is the beating heart of the Republican Party's GOTV field operation, okay?
Well, it used to be.
Yeah, it used to be,
Not
right?
anymore.
And in 16, now it's hard to believe because of the cult-like following, but even the party was kind of like walking away from Trump until he magically won. Okay, they wouldn't go to his convention and stuff. Like in that case, he also kept switching campaigns. He had no money. The advertising differential in that campaign and super PAC donations went heavily to Clinton. It was a huge disadvantage. And he had no infrastructure compared to Clinton. But what he had was the RNC. And the RNC knows how to get done in terms of field. Not anymore. The second Lara Trump took it over, she gutted out all of that, fired all the paid staff, and now they're outsourcing GOTV, their best bread and butter thing, to super PACs and Elon Musk, right-wing grifters like Charlie Kirk and super PACs, right? So to answer your question, Trump is very strong in the polls, and people need to accept that it's not a it's a feature, not a bug. A lot of white America is ready to embrace dictatorship if it preserves their power. Okay, and people are voting for that. They know what they're voting for. The other part may not, but the bulk of that coalition does. And he is in the polls. He's very strong. Does he have the field team in Wisconsin to win? I don't know.
There's an inherent, I think we were talking about this before, unfairness to just the question, right? Because Kamala Harris says one wrong thing and it gets blasted. And so her ability, just the kind of gaffe meter for her is it's just so sensitive. And for Trump, he literally stand on stage for 40 minutes, imagining John Lennon or something, and so part of the issue is there just is an unfairness to how this election is being covered between a woman of color and a man of orange, and so
a man of color too.
So he's got more room for error.
I think he's got more room for errors, but I would also agree with Rachel's point, and we haven't talked about it here enough. But I do think that Kamala Harris was for many people a new candidate and still kind of a new candidate, and I think that messaging on the economy is going to be really important in a lot of swing states, and the way to talk about the economy is not. It's just much being a bit more pro-business. I mean, I think that the communities that Kamala Harris is trying to bring back in, communities of color, working class communities in these states, are really sensitive to messages about the economy in a way, and saying government's going to get more involved in the economy is probably a less compelling message than we're going to take off some of the guardrails and let you make more money. And I wish they were a bit less progressive about it and a bit more kind of overtly pro-business in a way that is just the way I think people I speak to listen a lot of times.
Yeah, for the fear of being redundant, I agree with all of those things. That this is not a policy election, and if Kamala starts to be forced by the media into explaining more policy positions, which she's done already, but to introduce herself to people who are unfamiliar with her, there's a certain where you can only go so far with that because people's eyes glaze over when you start getting too much into the weeds. Joe Biden had a tendency of doing that because he was a senator for so long, and that's the natural tendency of politicians. But
of Democrats,
Democrats, correct. Yep. But you cannot bring a policy pen to a political guerrilla warfare fight, which is what we are in right now. And I think that some of the language that Kamala's used and the campaign is used by taking back the idea of freedom, taking back being, pro-business, saying she's a capitalist. Yep. Those things are on purpose because they cater to the people in the middle who are not comfortable with Donald Trump, but they don't really know. They're not too comfortable with that San Francisco liberal thing, right? That Donald Trump has tried to demonize. And, that's why some of the ad campaign that Donald Trump is running in swing states like Georgia and North Carolina is about Harris making comments about transgender prisoners. So he's tying everything back into immigration and the fear of immigration and these, she's a crazy left-wing liberal who's you send your kids to school and as a boy, they come back as a girl. Yeah. That's a real, a legit ad campaign that they are running during football.
Yep.
'Cause I'm a big football fan and I watch on local channels in swing states because I can do that online to see the ads that are being run. That's one. And then the next one is transgender, illegal immigrants in prisons that we're going to pay for the sex changes with taxpayer money. Yep. And it's like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. So they need to really be careful about getting into too much policy explanation and go for the bigger, more, bigger concepts about freedom, capitalism, the economy, and how the two different visions of America. Do you want to live in that America or this one?
Yep.
How does Trump lose it? Ground game is a perfect example of get out the vote matters. You can go to all the rallies you want. If those people don't actually vote, it doesn't matter. They've got to bank those votes. And the Republicans do not really have that ground game. So they may be talking to, like I said, to the brosphere out there now.
Yep.
But are those guys going to put their gaming systems down and get out of their parents' basement and actually go and vote? I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know how they're getting these people to actually vote. So
and Tara, we know they didn't register, okay?
That's right.
I had Tom look in the data because I was like, look, I want to know, this is their target demo, young men. They're trying to activate, what we call, low propensity turnout people. Is there any registration surge? And look in Pennsylvania because, as you know, Tara, they've really focused on Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And there's no surge. There is a surge for one gender, okay?
Yes.
And it ain't men. And that's what's going to make you guys sleep better, I hope, for the 3 weeks that we have 100%. To endure.
Is there an Elon Musk effect to that of bringing guys out?
No, because here's the thing is I shit you not. People are going to the Trump rallies that are not registered to vote. And how do I know that? Because I watched this guy, Scott Pressler, run around and register Trump rally attendees. So that should give you a scope. Here are people who went to a Trump rally and they're not registered to vote, right?
Right.
So, I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't lie to people. I tell people the truth, okay? As a consultant or as an analyst, I tell you the truth. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that if you told me, Rachel, you can either have men or women, I'd vote women 100% of the time, even without Dobbs, because women are more likely to vote.
Since 1980.
And they make up the majority of the electorate.
That's right.
Yep.
Let me ask one more and ask you to make your answers shorter, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Foreign policy often has a hard time breaking through as a votable issue. It's mostly domestic issues, even when there's a lot going on in the world. And I wonder whether one exception is the Gaza war, and especially because Kamala Harris is trying to signal that she's got a different approach from Joe Biden, who was her boss, and so far hasn't really given us much of an approach that's very different. Did the Biden-Harris position on Gaza alienate young voters from voting for Harris in this election? When we do the exit polls, when we do the after-action assessments, is Gaza going to matter?
No. Your turn.
Yeah.
No,
only in Michigan, possibly.
No,
maybe in Dearborn, but like here's the thing, guys, is that there's
so all those students on campuses around the country,
and they're not on campuses across the country. They're in liberal bubbles like San Francisco and New York. Okay,
I mean,
and
because
Harvard.
outside of this is not like a clear. It's not the Iraq War where the entire progressive movement is on one mind, because of the complications of anti-Semitism, especially, right? So this is an issue that if it was going to affect the vote, it would be in the data, and where you would see it is on the crosstab for party support. And we see a mild and important, perhaps determinative drop in party loyalty for people in polling data for the Republicans, and we do not see that for the Democrats. You did not see that in 2020. You did see it in 2016. And that's why we had that 6% defection rate in places like Wisconsin that gave Trump the presidency in that cycle. So to answer your question, as much as it gets a lot of media vacuum, especially social media vacuum, we're talking about a very micro issue.
The issue for me, I agree, is going to be in part about Michigan, and whether people vote for the Jill Steins or the other candidates who are the kind of third-party candidate. And so I think, this morning people may have seen that Biden said an American president threatened to withhold arms to Israel in 30 days if humanitarian conditions in Gaza do not improve. And so there's something going on that is a need to, remarkable to make that statement at this particular time. So I don't know the answer to this. I've worked in the Middle East a lot. I've interviewed people in the Middle East. I firmly believe that after the election, we need to really have a new approach. But the question of whether it's going to swing in the divisiveness, I just think it's in one particular locale. And the question is there going to be enough protest vote, third-party vote to swing a state that was a Democratic state and hopefully still will be?
People need to be more concerned about whether an American president is going to sic their own military on American citizens, as Donald Trump has said repeatedly. And so the fact that the attention, and not saying that what's happening over there isn't important, it's incredibly important. But the emphasis really needs to be on what is happening on American soil, given what the American president can actually do and not do when it comes to certain policies. And foreign policy is one of the few areas where the president has a lot of unilateral influence in decision making. Should be more important to people that a certain candidate wants to withdraw from NATO and is in having love affairs and fantasizing about thruples with Putin and Kim Jong-un. And the idea that we are not going to support our European allies in NATO and that we're going to cede that power to a murderous dictator like Vladimir Putin, these things have much bigger impact on us as Americans and our standing in the world than what's happening in Israel and Gaza, something that's been going on for thousands of years that we're not going to solve today, tomorrow, or in a year from now, possibly. But where we do have the most important impact is that our democracy does not defend itself, and neither will Donald Trump if he's elected. And that should be top of mind for most people in this country, and I hope so, because it's up to us what happens after that.
For the record, this is likely to be the only 2024 election conversation you hear that features the word throuple. I want to...
And for once, I'm innocent.
Well, he's the one talking about love letters,
Please thank our panelists, Tara Setmare, Jonathan Metzl, Rachel Bitecofer. And panelists, thanks for joining us here at Commonwealth Club World Affairs. You can get your hands on a copy of Rachel and Jonathan's books, Hit 'Em Where It Hurts and What We've Become, right outside. Both will be on sale in the lounge, and you can get them signed by our guests. If you'd like to engage in future programs or support Commonwealth Club World Affairs, please visit the website, www.commonwealthclub.org. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks a lot.